Hello and welcome back to the Jem Hawkes YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free wire tutorial here on YouTube today, I want to share with you a really incredibly simple design, the repeating Celtic charm in wire. Now this can build up to a really quite eye-catching necklace design. I'll show you this on the board in just a second, but it's really one technique in one wire gauge. All of this is made with 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I've just thrown that onto some beading thread, crimped it and added some chain. Really simple, beginner friendly tutorial. And for the piece that we've got just here, I've popped a couple of extra small beads in, which I will show you how to do. But if all you did was make the same thing 7 times, it's going to look really pretty. Let's have a closer look at that down on the board now. So this is the basic design idea. You're just going to make this slightly loopy, slightly Celtic inspired design. Very simple, very easy to make. And this is made in 1mm or 18 gauge wire. The central one I've decided to make just a little bit larger, but the rest of them are all the same size, or you could make them all the same size anyway. You could do this on a wire jig if you want to, but I'm going to show you how to do this with the fewest amount of specialist tools possible. I've simply added on 4mm round beads to this central piece, totally optional, and I've used a little bit of 0.5 or 24 gauge wire to add those in. If you don't want to add those in, it's all in the same wire gauge. All I have done is just added on a little bit of wire with some crimps at the back of the design and a very simple toggle clasp. What you could do, however, is just continue to bead all the way round instead. Absolutely up to you. I want to share this very simple, quick and easy to get the hang of design right now. So this is what we're going to be working towards, and I've got a couple of little staged sections here. Now, because I'm a bit of a stickler for odd numbers in jewellery, I've gone for 7 pieces. 6 of them are the same size and 1 is slightly larger. For the 6 that are the same size, I'm using 1mm gauge or 18 gauge wire. I'm working in round raw copper today. You could choose your colour preference, whichever you want to. And they're just a tiny smidge over 3 inches, so about 3¼ inches, which I guess is equivalent to about 80mm, I want to say. Something like that anyway. So let's just get diving on into that technique for today. So what I tend to do when I'm trying to make a repeating design is I will have stages to work to. The first thing that we're going to do is just warm that wire up to begin with. So I'm going to put some lovely heat and warmth through that wire very simply by running that between thumb and forefinger to add some flexibility and smoothness. Once that's nice and straight and warm, I'm going to take my round nose pliers. Now what you could do if you wanted a slightly easier tutorial is decide which size you want the small loops to be. If you have multi-step bail makers, that is definitely a great way of getting all of these loops the same size. Now if you don't have a set of bail makers, you can quite simply use your round nose pliers. If you want to try and replicate the same size over and over again, you could put a marker pen line on your round nose pliers, but I'm just going to wing it just to show you that if it doesn't come quite true, you can kind of fix it anyway. They're not perfect, but you get the idea. So I'm going to grip my segment of wire in the centre, and I'm going to start pushing those 2 sides up. And if I flip that down for a moment, you'll see that one side is much longer than the other. If that happens to you, all you do is start by pushing the longer side around until that all crosses over. So let me show you that on the side, and what you'll find is that 9 times out of 10 you're able to use as much of that length as you need to. Now as you can see, this side that is currently sticking up on the right hand is still much longer. So if you need to redress that balance, what we're going to do is hold those pliers like so, and what we're going to do is unwind the short side by pulling that firmly up and back, and then continue to push around the long side until you get those to sit where you want. Now once you have made your master charm, the one that you're going to copy over and over again, you'll be able to continue to create the same thing. Now, because I've got a little kink in the wire there, I'm just going to use my straight edged pliers. They've got two straight edges on the inside. These are bent chain nose pliers. But once I'm happy with both the angle in that V shape, might just open that out slightly by hand, that seems to be matching up quite nicely, then I can move on to the next couple of loops. What I tend to do, once I'm happy that I have centralised that first loop, is just give that a teeny tiny squish between the flat surfaces, and I'm not pressing down too hard and I'm not pressing where the wires cross, just to kind of set that shape. If I've got a shape that I'm happy with, let's try and retain that shape there. So the next thing I'm going to do is put loops on either side. So if I just give that a bit of a warm through on either side again, pop those pliers in. You can push the wire around or you can slightly rotate those pliers. One way or another, you're going to end up with another curl, or another loop over on the side. And what I tend to do is try and offer that down to my master as often as possible to try and replicate that design. Now that's just a little bit longer. So if I need to make that slightly shorter, I'm going to pop those pliers in and rotate around, like so. And then what you will need to do is grip the new loop you've made and draw that continual end of wire slightly down. So that looks reasonably accurate to my master. What I'm going to do now is flip that one over and flip this one over. So we can see we're pretty much on the money so far, but if you need to make any adjustments, now is the time to do so. So if I just pop that over the surface, you can see we're kind of getting there with some slight angles that need work. So again, I'm going to pop in with those round nose pliers, pop them up on the remaining longer side, put this over to one side a moment, rotate those around, and then draw the tail over and across. Now what you can see is that that's a little bit different to my master, so I will need to take a couple of minutes. I just pop that over and hold it still. Hopefully you can see that this side is much too far up in this direction. So what we're going to do is pop those round nose pliers in, rotate around, and draw that cross wire down. So what we would look to do is to try and preserve that shape and form and repeat it over and over again. So it's a little bit large on both sides and both of those loops are a bit large. So it is really a case of just giving that a little bit of a smush until it sits exactly where you want it to. Now if you do have a wire jig, then this is a great way to make use of it. If you've never used one before, they are quite handy. So let's have a look now and see if that's starting to resemble the master. It's as near as I care to worry about it for the essence of expediency. What I do is I have two masters because we need to put some upright bends. So I'm going to take the first one up out of the way and I will ensure that that is the one that I use. If you copy this and then put that in the pile to work and copy the next one, it's a little bit like photocopies. The first one can be vastly different to the last one if you're making a production line of these little charms. So I tend to have a master for the first shape where they cross over and a master for the second shape where I'm going to put those upright bends on. Now I wouldn't overly worry about having a second one if you don't want to, but it's just handy to give yourself an idea of how far up you want those angles to be. And it's just a little tiny bit longer. The distance between the lowest loop and one of the side loops, and then the distance between the side loop and the angle, that's just a tiny bit larger. Just from a nice looking angle point of view, I'm going to pop those pliers in and turn that wire up. And on the other side, turn that wire up again. I'm just going to straighten the whole design by just pulling those legs until it sits slightly flatter. And then I'm going to pop that over my second master to check to see if those angles are present and correct. So when I talk about having odd numbers in jewellery, what it enables us to do, and if I just pop the piece back up onto the bust for a second and show you, Having an odd number means you can have a central focal point. Now, whether you choose to have, let's say for instance, 7 of these repeated charms, and they're all the same size and there's no beads in them, it's nice to have that central drop point. It draws the eye to the piece of jewellery. And that, as jewellery sellers, is what we're looking to do. We're trying to make something that is attractive, something that is comfortable to wear, and something that is beautiful to behold. So I tend to go for odd numbers so that I can have that central point, and then symmetry either side. So obviously you can spend a lot more time getting these perfectly identical, especially if you have a little wire jig to work with. So if you'd like to join me back down at the board, I'll show you the next step, and it really is as simple as that. So I'm going to put my master to one side. They do like to get linked up, and what I tend to do is get a little mini production line of these all together. I'm just going to grab the necklace and pop it back down on the bust so you can see the finished article. And just snuggle that up into the corner so you can see that little bit there. So once you've got a whole production line of these pieces and you're happy with how similar they are to one another, you may, as I say, choose to have a slightly larger one in the centre. I will show you how to enhance that with beads in a second. What we would then need to do is to make sure that both of those ends up at the top are equal, so they're the same distance from the angle, and also that they have nice smooth tops to them. So you would use your flush cutters to achieve that. You can very simply hold that together and trim away if you need to. The next thing that we're going to do is to put a forwards bend where those angles have occurred. We're going to draw that ever so slightly forwards. I was very lazy there and did them both at once. And then we're going to use our round nose pliers to create a very simple loop. Now I have put my piece here onto beading thread. You may want to put it onto wire, but that will be defined, the wire size will be defined by what kind of hole size you have in your beads, and we'll come on to those beads on the main necklace in just a second. So I'm going to take one end of the wire where we've put that little forwards bend on, and I'm very carefully going to rotate that around into a very tiny, what I refer to as open and closable loop. So let's get that in the focal zone. I will tighten that up in just a second, but I want to have both of them going in the same direction for now. So just going to rotate those pliers around, very, very small and steady movements. So we're looking for those to sit side by side and up in a direct straight line. If I pop this down onto the board after I've just tightened up so there are no gaps, we don't want this falling off our beading wire, or beading thread rather, and pop that down onto the board. So let's say for the sake of argument that you've now made 7 of these. We want to have those loops that we've created at the top going directly upwards in a northerly position. If this is our south, then those need to be moving directly up northerly. And if I grab a piece of beading thread, hopefully you'll be able to see that. That's not a very good colour, but it's the one that I have. And what we would need to do is add our pieces on to the beading thread or our wire, whichever you prefer, in the order we want them to appear. So to highlight the fact that my central Celtic design drop charm was slightly larger, I popped those small beads in, and I'll show you that in a second. But I also popped a larger, this is a 12mm faceted black and white crab agate, and then the smaller beads are 4mm plain black agate smooth rounds. So just to highlight that the central piece was different, I put a large bead in between. For the rest of them, they've got a teeny tiny bead that sits up here between those 2 loops that we created. So if we imagine that I have threaded on all of my supplementary beads going around the edge, whichever design that you want to go for, what I'm going to do is introduce the end of my beading thread through the first loop and just allow that to sit up. I'll hold my finger underneath so you can see that slightly better. And then I'm going to grab one of those 4mm beads that's just gone walkabout, and I'm going to pop that onto the beading thread. We're only through that first loop so far. I'm going to pop that bead back down in between those 2 loops and draw the beading thread back until it just peeks out the end, and introduce that through the second loop and then pull that firmly. So in terms of the order I have on my display piece, it's 12mm bead between each of those little charms, and then a tiny 4mm bead inside the charm, like so. So if I was going to create this all the way along, it would be a single charm with a 4mm bead between those two small upright loops, then a large bead, repeat, repeat, repeat. And then when I get down to the centre, I have the option of having a slightly larger one. So if I just pop this up to the top for a second, I'm going to grab an extra piece of wire, which I haven't already cut. So I'm just going to pull that from the reel. So this would need to be slightly larger. This one is about 5 inches, whereas the others were 3 1/4. I'm going to make sure that that's nice and warm and smooth. So again, if you do have the opportunity to acquire stepped bell makers, they are fabulous. If not, your basic, cheap, inexpensive round nose pliers will do the job. So I found the centre, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing over again. I'm going to wind those wires until they cross over, seeing if I can get them to be a better same length this time. And I'm going to take that all the way down to the base of those round nose pliers. And what I need to do is just ensure that one of my tiny 4mm beads will sit in that aperture. So it absolutely will. That's great. So I know that the very, very base of my round nose pliers will work with my bead of choice. So what you may need to do is just take that angle over slightly further, slide that down, make sure that you don't trap your wire in the box joint or you'll get some square lines on it, and we want that to be nice and teardrop or rounded. Spare pliers and a hammer trying to get in on the action. So we would just repeat the exact same design initiative as we followed for the basic small charm drop. So I'm going to rotate that all the way around, flip the design over, and again I'm using the very, very base of my round nose pliers. You could decide which of these you wanted to use and just use the same one. Rotate those pliers around or draw the wire across, whichever works best for you. And then we're going to make the distance between here and here slightly larger before we put that angle in at the top. So again, I'm just going by eyeball. You would have a master if you were trying to recreate this over and over. And then because we're going to put a larger bead up at the top, I would open that out and I'm just very carefully, very gently coercing that to a position that I want it to sit in. So if you didn't want to add a bead in this design, you absolutely don't have to. But if you want to, you can. And I'll just show you that very, very quickly. Now I'm going to use a slightly heavier winding wire today, which is going to be a 0.5mm or 24 gauge. And I'm just grabbing what is essentially what could be a scrap of wire. Now let's grab one of those beads. I don't know where the other one went, so let's just assume that it's gone somewhere. And I'm just going to sit it in the design for a second, and I'm going to lay around about 1 inch over the surface of whichever of these apertures I want to add a bead to. I will use my pliers to rotate that around a good 3 or 4 times. If you want to completely fill that outer circuit of wire, you absolutely can, but you will need a much longer piece of wire. This is essentially a scrap length. So that is why I keep all of my scraps of wire, because they are really, really useful. Had a bit of a tidy up yesterday, so they've all gone in the melt pot for now. Get that end tucked away nice and neat and tidy. Inside, the end of the wire sits inside that round form we've got down at the base. Give that a bit of a squish and a squeeze. Get that coil nice and neat and tidy. Tuck the ends away. And then what we're going to do is introduce that bead that we borrowed. Let's see if we can find the bead hole. That would be a first. Drop that down into the aperture that we created. Now for me, if you look closely, you can see that the wire end comes down towards the lowest part of our charm design. So what you will sometimes see in wire jewellery is that the wire has gone through the bead and one side it will go down and the other side it'll go up. It's not for me. I prefer to see those coils of wire the same on both sides. So I would be at efforts to make sure that there's the same number of coils, and also that the coils of wire around that heavier wire that creates the charm itself, as long as they're going in the same direction as well. So we've gone for 4 wraps of wire. Just going to give that a bit of a smooth. Turn it over to the back of the design, trim away the excess, And then just use the tip of your fine pointed pliers like these. These are my bent chain nose. They're great for everything. Just tighten up both of those coils nice and neatly. The more time you spend doing this, the more likely you are to have repeat customers, and the longer your jewellery is likely to last. So again, you would need to put those small open and closable loops up at the top there, and then you can introduce that onto your beading thread or your beading wire, with or without a bead up at the top. You could go for another small bead if you wanted to, in which case you just need to squidge that until it sits neatly. Whatever works best for you. So I hope that you've enjoyed this repeating Celtic drop charm design. Really, really easy, but when you start to layer it up and repeat that over and over again, add in some pretty beads, and you've got really quite an effective piece of jewellery. Have yourself the most beautiful day. And don't forget to join me over on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, as well as here on YouTube. Jem Hawkes, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye for now.